Eleanor of Aquitaine was quite a remarkable woman, firstly for the simple reason that she was the only woman to ever be queen of both England and France, but also because of her character, which was multidimensional. Eleanor could be incredibly headstrong, but at other times she could also be seen to be quite vulnerable. Her husbands, firstly Louis VII of France, and after that marriage was annulled, Henry Duke of Normandy, and later Henry II of England, probably didn't realise the strength of the woman they had both married. Over the course of his long reign, Louis VII became increasingly devoted to religion, and this began to irk Eleanor somewhat. Whilst Eleanor had her own conventional religious beliefs, she became annoyed at the level of devotion that Louis displayed, eventually famously comparing the French king to a monk. This was, in Eleanor's eyes, clearly not how a French king should behave, and the queen wanted to have a more exciting life of adventure and indulgence. Such an opportunity for adventure would present itself in the 1140s with the Second Crusade, which Pope Eugene III had initiated following the fall of Edessa to Zengi in 1144. Louis VII would, along with Conrad III of Germany, lead the crusade, and Eleanor joined him. Unfortunately, the crusade would be a disaster, achieving nothing but hardships for the Christian army. Whilst on crusade, rumours reached Louis's ears that Eleanor was having an affair with her own uncle, no less, confirming the irreparable divisions that had emerged in their marriage. Whether the rumour was true or not, the marriage between Eleanor and Louis was annulled, with Eleanor not hanging about. She married quickly Henry Duke of Normandy, who was nearly a decade younger than her, not pausing to consider what her ex-husband would think. The marriage to Eleanor made Henry a very powerful man indeed, power which only increased when he became King of England 2 years later in 1154. The marriage between Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II would become one of the most infamous royal marriages in medieval history. It started well enough, as Eleanor gave the king a host of children, including four surviving sons, two of whom would become King of England after Henry. Eleanor hadn't been able to provide sons for Louis, giving him only two daughters, a factor in the annulment. But as Eleanor aged, her much younger husband found himself increasingly interested in younger women, most famously Rosamund Clifford. As far as Eleanor was concerned, this was little more than a base insult. She had repeatedly gone through the dangers of medieval pregnancy for Henry, but now, aged in her mid-40s, the king had lost physical interest in her and had practically cast her aside. Eleanor would not, however, take the insult lying down. It was said that Eleanor had Rosamund poisoned before she incited her sons to go into revolt against their father, playing on their frustrations at Henry's control. While some sympathy for Eleanor's feelings of frustration are understandable, her behaviour was reckless and irresponsible. The war between father and sons between 1173-74 and intermittently thereafter was destabilizing for Henry's empire. The king, on learning of Eleanor's treachery, was irate and imprisoned her for the remaining 15 years of his life. Eleanor had paid a heavy price for her folly. In 1189, on the succession of her favourite son, Richard the Lionheart, Eleanor would be released and would play an important part in Richard's reign and in the early years of the reign of Richard's brother, John. In 1192, whilst returning from crusade, Richard was taken prisoner by Duke Leopold of Austria, whom Richard had infuriated after the capture of Acre. Making himself a pretty penny, Leopold had handed the King of England over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, leaving Eleanor to try and secure Richard's release. Eleanor wrote to Pope Celestine III, whom she criticised heavily for his lack of action. Eleanor wrote, The kings and princes of the earth have conspired against my son, the anointed of the Lord. One keeps him in chains, whilst another ravages his lands. One holds him by the heels, while the other flays him. And while this goes on, the sword of St. Peter reposes in its scabbard. 3 times you have promised to send legates, and they have not been sent. In fact, they have rather been leashed than sent. These were bold words from a woman who was unafraid to speak her mind. But in a later letter sent to Celestine, Eleanor revealed a different side to her character. On this occasion, she said, "My posterity has been snatched from me. Henry the young king and Geoffrey, Duke of Brittany, sleep in dust. Their unhappy mother is forced to live on, ceaselessly tormented by their memory. I have lost the staff of my age, the light of my eyes." Here, Eleanor can be seen grieving for 2 of her dead sons, Henry and Geoffrey, but she was also mourning the plight of Richard. She was revealing a side to her that her previous actions as Queen of France and then England had hidden all too well. Nearly 70 years of age now, Eleanor had revealed a deeply vulnerable and sensitive side to her character. Eleanor was courageous, fierce, and determined, but she was also too headstrong, occasionally reckless and proud. She had an eye for talent. After a dramatic rescue, Eleanor had noted the potential of a young man named William Marshall who had come to her rescue. William, of course, would rise to prominence as one of the great knights of the medieval age, thanks to Eleanor's good word. As Queen of France and then England, Eleanor had created problems, but as Queen Dowager, she served her sons, Richard and then John, well, holding down the fort whilst Richard was languishing in prison and trying to keep John from causing more trouble for both Richard and then himself. Eleanor also helped raise Richard's ransom and had earlier escorted Richard's bride-to-be, Berengaria of Navarre, to Cyprus so Richard could marry her whilst he was on his way to crusade. In the final years of her life, Eleanor proved indispensable for her 2 sons, and the fact that she lived into her 80s says something of her strength of character. She was undoubtedly a complex woman, but one you can't help but admire.